Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Smarter Sourcing. My name is John Pavia, and today we are joined by Mark Vierling, and he is the founder and managing director of Provision Dynamics. Mark, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me, John. I appreciate it.
So before we go into your background, tell us about what is Provision Dynamics. I know what it is, but I think the people who are tuning in and listening, it might be helpful to level set for those who don't know what Provision Dynamics is.
Yeah, Provision Dynamics, I've been doing some work over the last close to 2 years now, formalized that earlier this year with the establishment of Provision Dynamics. And we're a fractional leadership group focused on supply chain and doing so in a manner where it's a little different from a consulting aspect in terms of that fractional being we become part of the team. So we come in and work as part of the team and can do that in an embedded consultancy. We can do it as a fractional leader for smaller companies that don't want that long-term burden for a supply chain leader. And that's really where we've found success so far. So it's a pretty exciting endeavor.
And I'm going to go into your background in a second, but what was it about the marketplace that you saw this opportunity? Or did it come after the pandemic, or that you saw a white space in the market that you thought the market needed a company like this?
Yeah, I think it's an underserved market, frankly. I think for years we've seen fractional COOs, fractional CEOs, fractional CFOs, even into the senior sales type of leaders. But there's not a lot of companies, there are not a lot of opportunities for providers in being providers in terms of that fractional role as a CPO or a senior supply chain leader. And when I kicked that off, I was actually asked to fill that role in a couple of places, and it really became apparent to me that it's an underserved market, and digging deeper into it and forming the relationships that I've had over the last couple of years, it really, really is. There's a lot of companies out there that say that they're doing this fractional leadership, but it's really kind of that executive placement type of effort. And what they're doing is they're connecting people on a fractional as opposed to having a company that's solely focused on how do we come in and help you improve your business.
Yeah, so you're not in the advice business. You're actually in the doing business.
We can certainly be and have been in the advice business. We prefer to be in the come in and help you do it business.
So let's go back. Tell us about your personal journey. How'd you get to this place where you are right now?
I actually went to school to be an airline pilot, and through working my way through college, I worked in a series of supply chain jobs and didn't really understand that I was building that skill set until the aviation aspect of it kind of fell apart. And I took a role in a management consulting firm. My first project was General Motors in Janesville. And when that project wrapped up, the GM team said, hey, we kind of like what you do. Do you want to stay? And I did for the next 11 years. Started on the floor as a supervisor, worked my way up through material superintendent, and really enjoyed my time there and learned supply chain probably in one of the most robust environments in terms of automotive. I left there and had the opportunity to join Kohler Company, which for me was the polar opposite. They had defined the need for procurement and supply chain to become a core competency instead of a cost of doing business, and they were looking for an automotive mentality. That allowed me to step in and take them from purely reactionary to somewhat proactive. I had the opportunity I was recruited out of there by General Electric. Unbeknownst to me, I was actually recruited in by General Electric to a company called Waukesha Engine. And within about 6 weeks of being there, they acquired it, and I became part of the acquisition team. Was there for a couple of years. I was concerned they spent that money on acquisition of the technology, not necessarily the facilities. And I enjoyed where we were in Wisconsin at that point in time and had the opportunity to join Oshkosh Corporation. Spent the next 8 years there. I worked in the defense segment. I worked in the fire and emergency segment, worked in the access segment on a global scale, and really, really enjoyed my time there. I was recruited out of there to become the chief procurement officer in Amtrak down in Washington, D.C. Totally different endeavor, if you will. Quasi-government is absolutely its own animal. And the politics associated with that are really a challenge. I enjoyed my time there. But it was really, into the transportation side and the service business versus an industrial business where you're making something. And then had the opportunity to join American Woodmark most recently as the first ever chief supply chain officer there. And that was a unique transition because they were really looking for transformation. And we did a tremendous amount of that in the time that I was there.
So when you were talking about Kohler, you made an interesting comment two comments actually, that Kohler, viewed strategic sourcing as a critical part of the business instead of just a cost center. And they wanted someone with an automotive mentality. What did you mean by that? What were they looking for?
Yeah, I think it was as much on the execution side of the supply chain as it was the sourcing side of the supply chain. But as you know, John, the automotive is top shelf in terms of the procurement side of the business and the execution side of the business. So for me, the opportunity was really to develop the supply chain in a fashion that supported or mirrored, if you will, the automotive model. The procurement side of that was fairly well structured. There were some things that we were able to improve upon in terms of commodity management and commodity structure. But at the end of the day, the biggest opportunity with that role was really to implement the supply chain, the automotive supply chain methodology into a company that was really a job shop.
So with each place that you've gone, you've tried to, and it sounds like have successfully brought transformation that looked for efficiencies, how to improve the process, of course, drive savings. Tomorrow you were brought into a new company and they said, take a look at how we're buying things, sourcing things. What's the first thing you look for?
There's a couple of things, right? It's alignment with what they expect, right? And what is leadership looking for? Because you don't want to come in with answers to questions that aren't being asked. First and foremost, understanding what the alignment of the vision is. And then secondly, come in and understand what current state looks like compared to what you understand good or great to be.
And how often do you find that there's because in my experience, when it comes to sourcing, procurement, supply chain, I think now it's different after the pandemic, but I think pre-pandemic, I don't think making sure your sourcing and procurement people were aligned with the company vision as you would with your business development people, but today I think that's changed a little bit. But do you find that to be the case still today, that there's not a lot of priority put into making sure your people who are out there sourcing, buying things, that they're really aligned with the corporate vision?
Yeah, and I find that especially with some of the smaller companies that I'm working with currently with Provision Dynamics is exactly that. There's not a true or a robust, I guess is the right way of putting it, tied to what the commercial demands of the business are going to be and how they're supported from a procurement and supply chain standpoint. Again, that's the fundamental difference there is proactive versus reactive, and a lot of that comes down to how well you're managing your demand management and your supply management, and that really is a robust SIOP process. And I've been surprised with how many firms still don't really utilize SIOP or understand SIOP for that matter.
How did that apply with Amtrak? Because with Amtrak, to me, I'm fascinated by Amtrak, have always been. Lots of questions. Like when I go over to Europe, like most people, Americans, they come back and like, why don't we have a rail system like they do over in West Europe? And I think that answer probably ties back to the automotive industry and the history there. But there, as the CPO, in addition to managing the things you normally manage when you're the chief procurement officer of any large organization, there you're managing risk on top of the politics and the government being a quasi-governmental agency. How did you manage the risk factor at Amtrak?
Well, I think it comes down to the application of the science of procurement and supply chain, right? I firmly believe that it is a science and it's not just something that's done. And I think it crosses industry and it's scalable. And as such, you have the opportunity to apply those principles, whether you're doing it in the public sector or the private sector, or, with an Amtrak for that matter.
So when you say, just go back to, and I know you talked about PsyOps before. So when you talk about the science of procurement and supply chain, and you're in a cocktail party or a dinner party, and you happen to reference that, and when people say, so what do you mean by the science of procurement and supply chain?
Well, I think that there's a common misconception, and it's changed fundamentally, right? I mean, over the last 30 years, it's become apparent that it's something more than just, hey, give me my parts. When I started at General Motors, I was a material guy. And what that meant was make sure that you get the part onto the dock and into the warehouse and to the line in a timely fashion. That was really what we focused on. In today's day and age, thanks to COVID and thanks to even the multiple instances of reaction to tariffs, it's become pretty clear that you need to be proactive in how you manage your business. And with that, there are items, and I look at it, we call it the 3 Ps. It's people, process, and performance, right? So the ability to apply common processes with skilled people and manage performance That's a science, and how you establish those and how you apply those to a business is really different than, hey, you know what? I'm building 1,100 cars, and that means I need 1,100 engines. So let's go ahead and buy as many. Let's go buy appropriately. But above and beyond that, there's not that much strategy believed necessary, but it truly is.
So when you think about on an industry basis, who do you think, is there an industry that you think that generally speaking, that one industry does it a lot better, is a lot more advanced when it comes to these principles than others right now? Automotive, CPG.
Yeah, I think automotive is still very strong, and they've just built upon a pretty robust platform that's always been in place. I think that some other companies that are really looking and have fundamentally changed supply chain. Look at somebody like Amazon, right? I mean, they just do things entirely different. They've created their own platform from a supply chain standpoint, and that's kind of an end game for them. But then you have really, really bright data-driven companies like FedEx and UPS that are in the middle of how you execute. So there's a lot of folks that have really taken a deep dive into excellence in terms of all aspects of supply chain. But I think if you look at it holistically, it's the big, the big 50, if you will, the Fortune 500s, if you will, that are really locked into doing it well.
So usually in these interviews, I'll wait to the end to ask the question. So tell me what's around the corner. How's technology going to change the way we're doing it today? But when I look at what you're doing today, Provision Dynamics, and you got a big focus on AI and ERP centralization. So I want to actually spend more time on that in this conversation than I normally would.
Sure.
When I think about ERP, it's whenever I hear someone say ERP, then there's a nightmare story that's coming after it. Meaning we implemented an ERP, and there's always some dramatic story about how hard it was to implement. What's the common missteps that companies are making when it comes to ERP, implementing ERP systems, and now marrying that with AI?
I think the biggest misstep is not understanding your current state and how it applies to what you want your new ERP to be. The easiest example I can give you is when I was at Amtrak, I inherited an Ariba on-demand implementation. And the biggest hurdle and the biggest problem that we found immediately was the fact that there was not a comparison done with current state to what an off-the-shelf application was going to bring us. And as a result, the thought was, hey, we're putting this off the shelf. It's going to simplify our P2P process and everything that we do. However, we didn't. There was no current state mapping associated with, well, how does this fit into the new ERP systems off the shelf effort? And what we found is that there was so much complexity that had been ad hoc into the existing that we needed to make significant change to what was considered off the shelf in order just to make the two systems talk. And what that amounted to for Amtrak was, 12 to 18 months worth of delay and millions of dollars worth of overspend to budget as a result. And that's a horrific story. Then you mentioned everybody's got one, but it's not an uncommon story. And I think that in order to do an ERP migration well, you really have to understand what your current state looks like and how you overlay that to what the ERP system offers, and make sure that everything that you think you're getting or you need is in that initial design of what your new ERP is going to be.
All right. So client XYZ comes to you. They've implemented their ERP, their latest ERP system. It's let's say it's working. They've gotten through the bumps in the road, and now they come to you and they say, Mark, now how are we going to really implement AI here? And I know what AI is, but no expert. How do we best use it? And how is it transforming companies that you're working with right now?
Yeah, I think it comes down to what you really want. Right. What do you want out of it? Right. I'm working with some companies that are in that source to procure realm, right, where they're increasing competition for companies based on their current customer base. So for example, a builder in Colorado, right? They've been working with the same suppliers for the last 20 years because that's just how they've always done it. And the ability to go in and understand what their current state looks like, understand what their commodity structure looks like, and find alternate sourcing or competitive sourcing that allows to drive, additional competition in. And you may find that just means that you're getting better pricing from your existing when you challenge them, but it increases competition. So that's an example of it in that source to procure end of the business. You can look at it from a downstream perspective in terms of compliance, right? Is everything that you expect out of your contract being delivered, and are all the boxes being checked? And you can use AI in terms of that compliance side of the business as well. You can use it in the execution end of the business, say logistics for argument's sake. Modeling logistics and potential logistics solutions are all AI opportunities. So it really depends on where you want to focus.
Where are you seeing it really being used effectively? And I'll give you an answer that I've seen now, or I've now heard about. And now this is more with the larger companies, but really using AI to try to predict what's that next thing it's going to be very scarce, hard to get, whether it's eggs, cocoa, the different things around the world that we've now seen in the last couple of years, even after the pandemic. All of a sudden there's a shortage, of eggs. And speaking with a couple of folks in your world, I'm amazed at how they're using AI and how they're getting ahead of these issues.
Yeah, for me, the primary focus in the companies that I've been working with, they're smaller companies. They're 500 million and less, and really what they're trying to do is understand how they get more competitive with it. I do think that modeling and the ability to take different market variables and establish algorithms and models are the future of AI. I don't know that there's that many people out there at that company size that are thinking that way, as opposed to how do I use this to make myself more efficient and more competitive. So for me, there's a ton of opportunity in terms of using it as a more clear or a clearer crystal ball. But I think most companies right now, as they start to scratch the surface, aren't there as much as, hey, this is what I do. How do I use AI to make myself better right now while I figure out what the future looks like?
What industry do you think it's going to have the biggest impact in the short term?
Well, again, it'd be the fact that I believe it's a science. I think it's applicable across all. So the bigger the company, the bigger the impact, right? Is really how I look at that.
You work with a lot of startups, a lot of early stage companies, I see. And what is it that the overarching message that you try to convey when you first meet a company like that's looking for the help that you provide?
My company and what we do is obviously something that we want to continue to grow. But what I like to do and where I am in my career is I want to help businesses get better, right? And there's a lot of companies out there that don't truly understand the value proposition that good procurement and supply chain brings. And frankly, because there can be investment in that. There's a lot of companies that will hold off on that because they don't understand that value proposition. And getting the message out that good, solid procurement supply chain can be a differentiator within any industry in which you operate needs to be just sung from the rooftops, if you will.
Okay, so as we look ahead 5 years and you think about the evolution of supply chain management, sourcing, procurement, what's the one key capability that's going to set apart the winners and the losers?
I really believe it's going to be data management, analytics, modeling, automation, business intelligence, and in a nutshell, the ability to spend more time with data than developing data. And I think that's where AI is really, really an important variable as we move forward into that predictive realm, if you will. There's a lot of companies that spend a considerable amount of time putting data together as opposed to using the data to make decisions for the business. And I think you can speed your business up just by having good data management moving forward.
So does that mean, as you think about people who are right now in college or in an MBA program and they're with a focus on supply chain management, if you were to advise them now, would it be, look, while you're in school, take some data analytics courses, because when you get out of here, being able to understand data and appreciate what sets apart good data from bad data is going to be mission critical to your success.
I do. I think that's a crucial part. And I've had that my son's actually studying supply chain in college right now. And it is a conversation I've had with him because I think that fundamentally AI and data and business intelligence is going to move the needle on what entry-level procurement and supply chain roles are in the future. If you think about entry level right now in the procurement realm, you're a buyer, right? And you process bids and you put bids out and then you get the information back and you put it together and you make your suggestion, right? That might be a buyer role. If the buyer role isn't, hey, I just execute purchase orders. I think that most of that work with AI and a lot of the business intelligence tools that are being developed currently is going to be eliminated. I think you're going to see automation in the bid processes. You're going to see automation in the RFP processes. You're going to see automation in the consolidation and recommendation portion of that. And the next level and the entry level, if you will, is going to be at that commodity management. So understanding the commodities within specific industries is going to be that entry level role moving forward.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. I spent a fair amount of my time. I came from a legal background, and I would always tell the lawyers, the young lawyers who are still in law school and those that were just getting out, understand how to read a balance sheet, a cash flow statement, a P&L, because in order to be, especially on the business side, you need to understand the basics of business. And I think today, I'm also telling that I have 4 kids in college, take a data analytics course, just
Absolutely.
of, how to understand data. Because
I could agree with you more.
Yeah. And I don't think it's being made a priority as much as it should be.
What's unique about that, though, is think about 25 years ago or 30 years ago, there were very few institutions that even had supply chain.
Right.
And when I went to college, it was business administration.
Right.
And that was really kind of an all-encompassing. I love the evolution of it in academia. I think that there are tremendous programs out there now with a focus on procurement and supply chain. But if you think about it in terms of that, the established academic institutions, they're in the early stages of that. So when you talk about, and I've had conversations with schools and been part of supply chain organizations in certain colleges and universities, and that's really what you're finding is that they're new to this.
So Mark, unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. And I really appreciate this. This has been a great conversation. For anybody who wants to follow along on what you're doing and keep up with you, how do they find you?
Yeah, they can shoot us a message at provisiondynamics.com or follow me at LinkedIn.
All right. Well, listen, thanks so much. Best of luck to you and to Provision Dynamics, and to all of our listeners and watchers. Thanks for tuning in. This has been John Pavi with Smarter Sourcing. Take care.